My name is Emily Davenport. I'm 27 years old, and when the invitations for my brother's wedding went out, mine never arrived. My parents called and told me bluntly that I wasn't welcome, that I would only embarrass them, and they expected me to leave it at that. I kept my distance, but I also built a life they refused to acknowledge, working late nights that led me to a powerful ally, the groom's father. On the wedding day, I walked onto the stage beside him, introduced as the partner who had secured his company's biggest win, and the perfect veneer my family had so carefully maintained cracked in front of everyone, and it's just getting started. The phone call didn't come with warning. No hesitation, no softness. My mother's voice was flat, the kind she used when she wanted no argument. "You're not coming to your brother's wedding. Don't embarrass us in front of everyone." That was it. No explanation, no apology. She hung up before I could even inhale enough to speak. I sat there in my apartment, staring at the quiet phone, the silence pressing against me harder than her words had. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. My parents had spent years polishing my brother until he gleamed, pushing me to the edges until I was little more than a shadow they could erase when convenient. But hearing the dismissal spelled out with such coldness, burned. The world didn't pause for my humiliation. The invitations went out, the family photos posted online, everyone glowing in carefully staged happiness. I wasn't tagged. My name wasn't mentioned. It was as though I had never existed. Friends messaged me, confused why I wasn't listed among the bridal party, why my parents didn't include me in the family updates. I responded with vague excuses. What else could I say? That my family had decided I was too much of a blemish to appear in their perfect picture? I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I stayed silent. But silence didn't mean absence. When the wedding day came, the city seemed to hum with it. The hotel ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, white flowers spilling across the stage, cameras flashing as my parents paraded themselves through the crowd. They smiled. They laughed. They showed off their perfect son, like he was a crown jewel. My brother stood at the altar, chest puffed with pride, while my parents beamed at him, radiating the satisfaction of people who believed they had everything under control. They didn't see me. Not yet. I watched from the back of the hall, unannounced, uninvited, invisible to them. Every detail of the event had been designed to project flawless success. The silk dresses, the polished speeches, the endless photos. It was all staged, rehearsed, a performance of family unity that was nothing but a lie. The MC's voice cut through the music. "Please welcome the groom's father to the stage." Chairs scraped, heads turned. The audience clapped with polite expectation. But the moment he walked up, the air shifted. Because he wasn't alone. I walked beside him, hand in hand, my steps steady, deliberate. The crowd's applause faltered, confusion rippling across the faces staring back. I didn't sneak in. I didn't hide. I moved with him like I belonged there, because I did. My parents' faces were the first I found. Their smiles froze mid-performance, eyes widening as though they'd seen a ghost crawl out of the grave they thought they'd buried me in. My brother's jaw slackened, his polished image cracking as recognition hit. The groom's father, a man with commanding presence and the kind of respect my family had always craved, stopped at the microphone. He didn't hesitate, didn't fumble. His voice carried, strong and certain. "Ladies and gentlemen, before I say anything about my son's special day, I want to introduce someone important to me. This is the partner who helped me secure the largest deal my company has ever seen. Without her, none of it would have been possible." The ballroom went silent. Cameras paused mid-click. Whispers darted through the crowd like sparks. My brother's bride looked uncertain, her practiced smile twitching as she glanced between me and my family. I stood there, not as the daughter erased from invitations, not as the sister cut out of photographs, but as the woman the groom's father had chosen to acknowledge in front of everyone. My name, my presence, rang louder than the orchestra waiting to play. The shock on my parents' faces was a satisfaction I didn't bother hiding. For once, they couldn't mute me, couldn't cut me from the frame. The child they canceled had returned, not in shadows, not in silence, But on stage, standing higher than all of them, the applause didn't return. It wasn't silence either. It was something heavier, like the air itself had been knocked flat. The wedding, polished and rehearsed for months, was no longer theirs to control. My parents sat frozen in their front row seats, smiles ripped away, eyes darting as if searching for a way to undo what had just unfolded. The groom's father continued, his tone steady, carrying no trace of awkwardness. He spoke my name clearly, introducing me not as a guest, but as his partner in business, the woman who had stood beside him through months of negotiations, planning, and strategy. He laid it out in front of everyone. The deal that would define his company's future, the one that had elevated him beyond his competitors. And right there, in front of hundreds of witnesses, he credited me. Every word was a blow to the story my parents had crafted, the version where I didn't matter. My brother's carefully built pride cracked in real time as people shifted in their chairs, murmuring, eyes bouncing between me and my family. This was no accident. I hadn't stumbled into that stage by chance. I had spent months preparing, building this moment with precision, while they were too busy cutting me out. I scanned the room. Some faces were stunned, others curious, a few intrigued by the drama unraveling in front of them. But it wasn't the crowd I was watching, it was my parents. My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around the armrest. My mother, always the actress, tried to pull her expression back into something polite, but her hands trembled in her lap. For the first time in years, they weren't in control. The MC, clearly caught off guard, stumbled over his notes before regaining his footing. "Thank you, sir," he said nervously, his eyes flickering toward me as if unsure how to frame what had just happened. He tried to move the program forward, but the shift had already taken place. No matter what came next, people wouldn't forget what they'd just witnessed. I didn't need to say anything yet. My silence was louder than words. Standing beside the groom's father, I allowed the weight of his recognition to settle over the room. My family had erased me from their story, but now I stood stitched into a new narrative, one they couldn't edit. When we stepped down from the stage, heads turned to follow us. Conversations sparked in hushed voices, curiosity spreading like wildfire. I felt the eyes of relatives, distant cousins, and acquaintances who hadn't seen me in years, all struggling to piece together what they'd missed. Some gave polite smiles, others narrowed their eyes, measuring what this meant. We returned to our seats near the front, far closer than my parents would have ever allowed me if they'd controlled the guest list. The bride's family shifted uncomfortably, whispering behind programs, trying to gauge whether to be alarmed or impressed. My brother refused to meet my eyes. His smile, forced and tight, stayed plastered on his face for the cameras, but his shoulders betrayed him, stiff, tense, barely containing his anger. The ceremony proceeded, but the energy had shifted. The officiant's words floated in the air, drowned by the tension that hung heavier than the chandeliers above. My parents clapped at the right moments, but their hands moved mechanically, their expressions strained. Every camera flash seemed to highlight their discomfort, each photo capturing their attempt to pretend this wasn't happening. For me, it wasn't about ruining their event. It was about reclaiming space they had stolen from me. For years, I had been cut out of birthdays, holidays, every milestone where my presence didn't fit the version of perfect they wanted to project. And yet, here I was, not begging for entry, not sneaking in, but invited and honored by someone they couldn't dismiss. As the vows ended and applause rose again, I leaned back in my chair, calm, unshaken. The whispers hadn't stopped. People would carry this story home, dissect it, retell it with their own interpretations. My absence had once been invisible, but my return had made it impossible for anyone to forget me. When the couple walked down the aisle together, my brother's glance finally landed on me. It wasn't shock anymore. It was fury. The same fury of someone who realized the spotlight wasn't fully his anymore. He looked at me as though I had stolen something from him, but he was wrong. I hadn't stolen. I had reclaimed. The reception opened with music and chatter, but the fractures were already there. My parents tried to circulate the room, shaking hands, laughing a little too loudly, but every conversation carried an undercurrent. Guests asked careful questions, some bold enough to approach me directly. Who was I working with? How long had I been involved in the deal? Was it true I had been behind the scenes of something so significant? I answered each one smoothly, never defensive, never over-explaining. My presence spoke for itself. The groom's father occasionally leaned over, affirming what I said, backing me with the weight of his authority. Together, we formed a front my parents couldn't penetrate. At one point, my aunt, one of my mother's closest sisters, approached me, her voice low. "I didn't even know you were coming," she said, eyes flicking toward my parents across the room. "They never mentioned." She stopped herself, the realization settling in. She gave me a small nod, as if acknowledging something she hadn't dared to before. That was the difference. People who had always dismissed me as an afterthought were now forced to confront the truth. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't lesser. And I wasn't going anywhere. By the time dinner was served, my parents' facade was cracking. My mother sat rigid, barely eating, her eyes scanning the room like she could pull strings to make me vanish. My father kept his head down, speaking only when spoken to. The control they had built their entire lives around was slipping, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The reception hall had been designed for celebration, but by the time dessert was cleared, the night had turned into something else. Music still played, waiters still moved between tables, but the tension spread so thick it drowned out the carefully rehearsed joy. Conversations that should have been light, toasts, congratulations, family laughter, were fractured, shifting constantly toward me. I hadn't spoken directly to my parents yet. That wasn't an accident. I let them sit in silence, suffocating in their own discomfort, watching from across the room as people approached me, one after another. Each conversation tightened the noose they had woven for themselves. They had erased me, told the world I didn't matter. Now the same world was watching as I sat at the groom's father's table, my name whispered with interest, my presence undeniable. Finally, my brother snapped. He pushed back from his chair, his bride gripping his arm to steady him, but his anger was too sharp to hide. He walked straight toward me, eyes locked on mine, ignoring the way half the room turned to watch. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, but not low enough. Guests nearby caught every word. I met his glare, without flinching. "You heard the introduction." He leaned closer, his tone biting. "This is my wedding. You had no place here." The groom's father, who had been listening quietly, set down his glass and spoke before I could. "She had every place here. Without her, my company wouldn't be standing where it is. You should be grateful to share the stage with her." The room stilled again. My brother froze, his face tightening, realizing the man whose approval he'd been desperate to secure had just sided with me. His bride shifted uncomfortably, tugging his arm, but he refused to move. "Don't act like this changes anything," he spat quietly, though his words carried far enough for the nearest tables to hear. "They still don't want you." I let the weight of his words settle. He was right, my parents would never choose me, but I wasn't here to win their approval. I leaned in, my voice calm, steady. I didn't need their permission to exist. And tonight, I didn't need their invitation to stand higher than them. His face darkened, but before he could respond, the MC returned to the microphone, calling the couple back to the stage for their first dance. My brother pulled back, shooting me one last look, a mixture of rage and humiliation, before turning away. The bride forced a smile as cameras followed them, but the joy had drained out of the performance. The dance played out like theater, graceful but hollow. Guests clapped politely, but the whispers never stopped. My parents' dream of a flawless evening had shattered hours earlier, and now every moment of the reception was built on fractured ground. Later, when the floor opened for dancing and chatter, my mother finally approached. She moved stiffly, her expression a mask of forced composure, but her eyes betrayed her. "You had no right," she said, her voice low and sharp. "This was supposed to be about your brother." "It still is," I replied evenly. "But you made sure I wasn't part of his story. I wrote my own." Her lips pressed thin. You humiliated us. No, I said, holding her gaze. You humiliated yourselves the moment you decided I didn't belong. Tonight just exposed it. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, realizing the crowd around us was watching. For once, she didn't have the power to twist the narrative. She turned abruptly and walked away, her shoulders stiff. My father never came over. He stayed in his chair, staring down at the table, his silence saying more than any words could. The night dragged on, but nothing they did could erase what had already happened. By the time the last song played, I had spoken with more guests than either of my parents. People who had once ignored me now leaned in with genuine curiosity, offering contacts, asking about my work. My parents faded into the background, their control fractured beyond repair. When I finally stood to leave, I didn't slip out quietly. I walked straight through the center of the ballroom, past the stage, past the tables, past the cameras still lingering on the fading party. The groom's father walked with me to the doors, shaking my hand firmly, thanking me again for everything I had done. His words carried loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. As I stepped out into the night, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. They had canceled me from their picture, but the picture no longer mattered. I wasn't the erased daughter anymore, or the forgotten sister. I was the woman who had taken the stage they tried to deny me, and I had done it on my own terms.